I'm Kristen Cannon, and I'm here to talk today about packing. Now, are you one of those people who you go to the airport with just a zillion suitcases, you need one of those baggage carts, and it's a big ordeal? I understand. When I was 15, I took my first international plane trip. The band went to London, England to perform in the New Year's Day parade. It was really awesome. But man, was I unhappy when I found out we were only allowed one 70-pound suitcase. Now, I'm showing my age there. This was back in the day when it was common, even on domestic flights, that you got two 70-pound bags checked for free. But because we were taking all of our marching band gear, we had uniforms, instruments. My little clarinet, that would fit in a suitcase just fine. But we had drums, sousaphones, the whole gamut. And so also to make sure nobody lost anything, we were 80-some teenagers, our band director arranged for everything to be collected ahead of time, boxed up, and then he was really smart. He worked out with the airline that we would ship these boxes in lieu of the second suitcase for each person. This helped keep our costs down, our equipment went with us, and really it was a win-win. But 15-year-old me couldn't believe that I was expected to travel for nearly a week with only one 70-pound suitcase. Now, looking back, I realize that I didn't know much about traveling. It's actually best to travel with less luggage, especially when you're going to Europe, Asia, places where you're going to need to take public transportation. You might be taking public transportation from the airport to your hotel, and in a lot of countries, the best way to get around is to take the train. And if you're schlepping big heavy suitcases, that's not gonna be easy. Now, sometimes you don't have a lot you can do about it. I've lived in both Germany and China, and when I'm moving to or from a location, I need more stuff. It's a lot different than taking even a 4 or 5 week trip and living there. However, it can still be really tough. I remember one time when I was living in China, I was desperate for reading materials. So when I was home over the summer, I purchased a whole bunch of used books, and I filled an entire old suitcase with books. 70 pounds of books. Now, this suitcase was an old one that my parents had said I could just leave in China, and so instead of having one of those pull-up handles, it had an old school leash. I remember when my parents first got that suitcase, they were so excited because they're like, look, we can walk the dog! And they were talking about the suitcase. Because it had a little pull-out piece, and you would grab it between your two fingers like this. Well, the problem is, I flew into Beijing, and then I had to take the train to Bodo in Inner Mongolia. So I took an airport shuttle, but the airport shuttle stopped about 1 kilometer from the airport, and I had to walk the rest of the way with my regular suitcase. It had a much more hand-friendly handle, and this leashed suitcase as well as my backpack. And walking 1 kilometer over these cobblestone-style sidewalks, my hands were torn to pieces. They were red and blistered for pulling all of this weight. Now, if I had to do it again, back in the days before e-readers, I would, because I really needed that reading material. But if you can avoid taking such a heavy suitcase, I recommend it. Now you might be going, well, Kristen, this sounds lovely, but I still need a lot of stuff. Trust me, you really don't. So today I've got 5 tips for you on how to reduce the amount of luggage that you're carrying. Tip number 1, use ebooks. Now, back in the day before I had my Kindle, I used to always travel with 3 books in my carry-on. The first book was the book that I was reading. The second book was the book for when I finished the first book. And the third book was in case I decided I didn't like either of the first 2 books. And then if I was traveling for more than 4 or 5 days, my checked luggage had even more books. When the Kindle came out, I was so excited. I was one of the first adopters of it because now I can carry thousands of books on my Kindle Paperwhite. I love it. But even if you're not a big reader, when you're traveling, you're going to want to have some guidebooks. I highly recommend guidebooks. And back in the day, the suggestion used to be to tear out the pages of the guidebook that you're going to need. Well, I never liked that suggestion. 1, because I hate to wreck a book. And 2, what if I changed my mind? Maybe there was something else I needed that I didn't tear out. Well, there's beautiful solutions to that now. Electronic guidebooks. Definitely travel with electronic guidebooks. I do download them to my phone rather than to my Kindle because guidebooks are best in color, and a lot of times they've got clickable links that a dedicated e-reader really isn't the best choice for. Tip number 2, mix and match your clothing. So if you bring clothing that's all mix and match instead of things that only go together in one specific outfit, then you can get more outfits with less clothing. Also, with your footwear, pick footwear that 1 is comfortable. You're probably going to be doing a lot of walking. And 2, again, make sure your footwear can go for multiple outfits. You don't want to have a lot of different pieces of clothing. I'm going to a wedding in September in India, and for this I've got to have some nicer clothing. There's a whole bunch of special events that I'm going to need to dress up for. So this is where the mix and match really comes in handy. I'm going to pack some skirts and blouses that are interchangeable, and that way I can create more outfits with less pieces. Tip number 3 is to roll your clothing and fill your shoes. Now, this isn't going to help you with weight. And a lot of what I've been talking about is weight, especially even weight on my hands, weight. A lot of times you have to go up and down stairs, things like this. It's okay. This one will still help you shrink the size of your bag down. One time when I was in China, and this was, I think this was in 2008, I was visiting China for 2 months. And so I had packed one full-size suitcase, but I was taking the train to Inner Mongolia. Now, I speak Chinese, and so I was going down the aisle of the train. Of course, my berth was on the far end of the carriage from where they let you in. So I'm going down, and in Chinese, I'm like, excuse me, and people are going, foreigner, look, there's a foreigner. The foreigner speaks Chinese, and they're not moving. And I'm having to go, excuse me, make space, my bag is big. Whereas if I had just a small carry-on suitcase that I travel with now, I could have gotten through those aisles a lot more easily. Now, people would have still stared at me. It's just a fact. But nonetheless, this one helps to reduce the size of the suitcase. So what I do is I start by filling in the spaces created by the handle in the suitcase. You know, when you look at the bottom of your suitcase, your handles have created these like divots. I fill those divots with small items, swimsuits, bras, underwear, thin shirts, things like that, where I can level it out. Next, I'm going to take jeans, skirts, pants, blouses, shirts, all of those kinds of things, and I'm going to roll them. This not only helps to save space, but it also reduces wrinkling, which is really useful. Next, I fill in the cracks in between, and then I put the bulky items like hoodies, towels, etc. on the top. And then usually I find I still have a few more little items, and so I kind of fill in more of the cracks with those. A few years ago, I traveled with my parents, and we went on a trip to Los Angeles, Sydney, Cairns, and Melbourne. And so this was June, so Los Angeles was hot, but it was winter in Australia. Melbourne was cold. Sydney was fairly moderate, and Cairns, being up in northern Australia, was pretty warm. In Cairns, I was snorkeling the Great Barrier Reef, so I'd also packed my snorkeling gear. And so I met up with my parents in Los Angeles, and we spent 6 days in LA, and I just kept pulling different things out. And then finally, when I pulled out not just a full-size terry cloth beach towel, but a big beach towel, my mother looked at me and she went, "Where did you get that from?" She said, "I've seen your suitcase. It's not that large. You keep pulling out more and more things." This, my friends, is the power of rolling your suitcase. Not your suitcase. Rolling suitcases are handy too, but rolling your clothing. It helps you to fit more into your suitcase. Alright, so now we are on to tip number 4. Wear your bulky items on the plane. If I'm traveling in the winter, I always wear my coat on the plane. If I'm wearing athletic shoes, those are the things that I'm gonna wear on travel days, whether that actually be on the plane or on the train. Then I don't have to find room for them in my suitcase. Now, there is an important caveat to that, and that is sometimes when you're traveling from a cold location to a hot location, you might need to later on have a way to pack bulky items. For example, I went to Thailand in February, and I was going from China via Seoul. In Seoul, I flew into one airport, took the subway to another airport, and then flew out from that airport. And in Beijing and Seoul, it was very much winter. So I was wearing my athletic shoes. I had on jeans, a sweater, and my winter coat. When I got to Phuket, however, it's now a tropical paradise. I landed in Phuket and I got out of the airport at about midnight. My first night's hotel, because I was arriving in Phuket so late, was close to the airport. It was about a 1-mile walk, or maybe it was 1 kilometer, I don't remember, but it wasn't very far from the airport. So I took my coat off. Actually, I hadn't put my coat on since I left Seoul, and I put it over the handlebars of my suitcase, and I made my way to the hotel. But by the time I got there, I was just drenched from wearing that sweater and even just carrying this, touching the suitcase with the coat. It was a wool coat, and then my jeans. I was soaked. I checked into the hotel, went into my room, turned on the air conditioning, and just stood in front of the air conditioning going, oh, trying to cool down. So this is where that caveat comes in, because after that, when I changed hotels within Thailand, within Phuket actually, to meet up with some friends, and then as I continued on to Hong Kong, a lot of that stayed packed. I packed the suitcase. Of course I packed the suitcase. I packed the coat in the suitcase, and then I also put the jeans and so forth. Now, when I went to Hong Kong afterwards, it was milder, so the coat stayed packed, but I did wear other bulkier items on the plane to Hong Kong. The way I was able to add in these bulky items, though, was by using the expansion part of my suitcase. And this is why it's really important to not expand your suitcase when you're leaving home. It allows you room to buy trinkets and souvenirs. I'm not big on buying those, but I know a lot of people are, and that's perfectly fine. You do you. But for me, I could then put my coat in there and not have to deal with carrying it around. All right, that takes us to tip number 5. Tip number 5 is possibly the most controversial, and that is that you can wear your clothes more than once. And you might be like, but Kristen, I'm going to a hot climate, they're going to get sweaty and gross. Yeah, depending on where you're going, they might not be wearable more than one day. However, you can also wash your clothing. One of the things that I love is this. This is actually a bar of Tide laundry soap. Now, they don't sell this in the United States. I got this in China. In China, it comes in 2 packs, and it, says Tide, and it's good for washing in cold water. But on Amazon, you can find a variety of products for hand washing your clothing that aren't liquids. Avoid the liquids, they can cause a mess. But you can find soap bars, you can also find some sheets that are good for washing your clothes, things like that. And so this is a real lifesaver. That's how I can travel for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks and only take a carry-on size suitcase. It's because I wash my clothing. Now, there are a couple of things you have to be aware of. The first one is you have to be aware of the weather where you're washing your clothes and the fact that in hand washing you don't have a spin cycle. So without a spin cycle, when you're done washing your clothes, no matter how well you try to wring them out, they're not going to be nearly as dry as they are after you wash them in a machine. Now, sometimes you might be able to wash your clothes in a machine. When we were in Australia, we actually had access to washing machines in several of our accommodations. So that is sometimes a possibility as well. And if that's a possibility, take it. In Thailand, it was actually cheap to hire somebody to wash my clothes. So again, another good option. But otherwise, when those aren't an option and you're gonna use the laundry soap, just remember your clothes are going to be wetter, which means they're going to take longer to dry, especially if you're in a very humid climate, because when it's humid, there's a lot of moisture in the air, and so with the higher vapor pressure, your clothes don't dry as well. I recommend quick dry fabrics. In the summer, I like to wear thin capris. They're still cotton, but because they're thin, they'll dry quickly. And then I also like to wear tops that are in quick dry fabrics. You can also get your bottoms in quick dry fabrics as well, but I like cotton. If you're traveling with jeans and stuff, I highly recommend trying to find some way to actually get your laundry washed with a washing machine. Or 2, you really have to plan a few days for those to dry, unless you're going to a really dry climate. The beautiful thing about traveling to dry, arid regions is most of your clothing will dry overnight to within a day or so, even if you've got thick cotton fabrics that are going to hold that moisture, because they're going to evaporate very quickly. But remember, if your clothes aren't visibly dirty, they don't smell, and you didn't sweat all over them, you can also just re-wear them. Now, I'm not saying that you have to wear the same exact outfit day after day. Remember, one of the earlier tips was mix and match clothing. This is a way to avoid having to wash it, especially in the winter if you've got those thicker fabrics, but you're also less likely to sweat in winter climates. And 2, just to make life easier. So when I travel, those are the tips that I use. And so that's how I can travel really indefinitely at this point, with nothing more than a small carry-on size suitcase. And then I do travel with a backpack, not a like big hiking backpack, but like a computer bag backpack. That's where I put my camera gear, my toiletries, any toiletries that won't have a problem with liquid limits, toiletries, medications, etc. But I find that when I have just a small suitcase and the backpack, I can get around any form of transportation quite easily, And so I recommend that you don't be like 15-year-old me that's like, I have to have all this. But rather you be like grown-up me who says, no, I can make choices and I can pack lighter and make my trip more enjoyable. Alright, if you enjoyed these stories and if you enjoyed the tips and tricks, then please like this video, subscribe, comment, help me grow my audience. And until next time, bye!